She fell in a snowstorm with her baby. The sheriff who came upon her changed everything, plus the sky had been gray since morning. But by late afternoon it had turned into something heavier, something that made people uneasy. The weather reports had warned everyone about the coming snowstorm. The anchors spoke calmly, but their eyes told a different story. They advised people to stay home, avoid unnecessary travel, and prepare for strong winds and freezing temperatures. Most people listened. Emily Harper wished she could. She stood by the front door of her small rental house, holding her car keys tightly in her hand. Her 6-month-old son, Noah, rested in a carrier on the couch, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. He had been coughing lightly for 2 days. The doctor had said it was a mild cold and nothing serious, but Emily's heart still worried. Being a mother had changed her in ways she never expected. Even the smallest sound from Noah could make her anxious. Her sister, Rachel, lived almost 2 hours away in a small town across the county line. Rachel had called that morning after hearing about the storm. "Come here before it gets bad," she had insisted. "You shouldn't be alone with the baby during a snowstorm like this." Emily had looked outside at the calm street. It didn't seem so dangerous then, just a quiet winter day. She thought if she left early enough, she could reach Rachel's house before the weather turned worse. Now, as she opened the front door, cold wind brushed against her face. It carried tiny flakes of snow that had just started falling. They looked harmless, light, and soft as feathers. For a moment she hesitated, but then Noah made a small, restless sound from inside. "I'll drive carefully," she whispered to herself. She placed Noah gently into his car seat in the back of her small sedan. She tucked an extra blanket around him and adjusted his tiny knit cap so it covered his ears. He blinked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. That look always gave her strength. The engine started with a low hum. The heater slowly began pushing warm air into the car. Emily pulled out of the driveway and onto the quiet road. The town looked almost peaceful. Streetlights flickered on early, casting a golden glow over the white beginning to cover the ground. At first, the drive felt normal. Snowflakes drifted lightly across the windshield, and the wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm. Emily kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel. She drove slower than usual, careful at every turn. In the back seat, Noah had fallen asleep. His tiny chest rose and fell softly under the blanket. Seeing him, calm helped Emily relax a little. But about 30 minutes into the drive, things began to change. The snowfall grew heavier. What had been gentle flakes turned into thick waves of white. The wind picked up speed, pushing snow across the road in swirling patterns. The clear lines on the highway slowly disappeared under a growing layer of ice and snow. Emily leaned forward slightly, trying to see better. The world outside was becoming blurry. Trees along the roadside looked like shadows behind a white curtain. She turned the radio down so she could focus. The only sounds were the wind and the steady swish of the wipers. She checked her phone at a red light. No new weather alerts, but the signal bars had dropped from 4 to 2. "It's okay," she murmured quietly. "Just keep going." The highway became less crowded the farther she drove. Fewer headlights passed by. The sky darkened earlier than usual, as if evening had decided to arrive ahead of time. Snow gathered along the edges of the road in small piles that were quickly growing larger. Her shoulders tightened. Another gust of wind hit the car, making it shift slightly. Emily gripped the wheel harder. She slowed down even more. She reminded herself not to panic. She had driven in snow before. She just needed to stay calm. Suddenly she noticed something that made her heart skip. The road ahead looked shiny, too shiny. Before she could react fully, the car's tires rolled onto a thin layer of black ice hidden beneath the snow. The steering wheel felt strange in her hands. Light. Loose. The car began to slide. At first it was slow, almost gentle. But then it spun faster. The world outside turned into a blur of white and gray. Emily gasped. She tried turning the wheel carefully the way she had learned in driving school, but the tires would not grip the road. The car spun once, then again. Noah woke up and started crying from the back seat. "Please, please," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. The vehicle slid off the highway and down into a shallow ditch on the side of the road. It stopped suddenly with a heavy thud. The engine cut off. For a few seconds, everything was silent except for the wind howling outside. Emily's hands trembled. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She blinked quickly, trying to understand what had just happened. "I'm okay," she whispered to herself. "We're okay." She turned around immediately to check on Noah. He was crying loudly now, his small face red with fear. But he was safe in his car seat. No visible injuries, just scared. "I'm here," she said softly, unbuckling her seatbelt and reaching back to touch his tiny hand. "Mama's here." Snow continued to fall heavily, covering the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Emily turned the key in the ignition. The engine made a weak sound. Then nothing. She tried again, another weak attempt, but the car would not start. A cold feeling settled in her chest, deeper than fear. She grabbed her phone quickly, one signal bar. She tried calling 911. The call failed. She tried again, no connection. The snow outside was growing thicker. Through the side window, she could barely see the road anymore. Cars passing by would not easily notice her vehicle in the ditch, especially as snow began piling against it. She turned the key once more, hoping for a miracle. Nothing. The heater slowly stopped blowing warm air. The inside of the car grew quieter. Too quiet. Noah's cries softened into small whimpers as Emily unbuckled him and carefully lifted him into her arms. She wrapped him tighter in the blanket and held him close to her chest. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Someone will come." But as the minutes passed, the storm only grew stronger. Snow pressed against the windows. The sky outside turned darker, even though it was still early evening. Wind rocked the car gently, almost like a cradle, but there was nothing comforting about it. Emily looked around at the empty road beyond the snow-covered glass. For the first time, she realized something deeply frightening. No one knew exactly where she was. The inside of the car felt smaller with every passing minute. The storm outside showed no sign of slowing down. Snow kept falling in thick, heavy waves, covering the windows and pressing against the doors. The wind howled across the open fields, shaking the car gently but constantly, as if reminding Emily that they were alone in the middle of nowhere. Emily adjusted Noah in her arms and pulled the blanket tighter around him. His tiny face was warm against her chest, but his hands were starting to feel cooler. That scared her more than anything else. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing her lips against his forehead. "Mama's here, I've got you." She tried the car engine again, turning the key slowly, hoping something would change. The engine made a faint clicking sound and then went silent. She leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes for a second. Panic tried to rise in her chest, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. She had to think clearly. Panic would not help Noah. The heater had completely stopped now. The warm air that once filled the car had disappeared, replaced by a creeping cold that seemed to slide in through every tiny crack. The windows began to fog up from her breath. She wiped the inside of the windshield with her sleeve, but it didn't help much. Snow on the outside blocked most of the light anyway. She checked her phone again. No signal, just a small empty icon at the top of the screen. Emily remembered reading somewhere that when stuck in snow, it was safer to stay inside the car. Walking in a snowstorm could be dangerous, especially with a baby. The road might look close, but distances in heavy snow could be misleading. She looked toward the highway through the side window. All she could see was white and faint shapes moving in the wind. Even if she stepped outside, she wasn't sure she would make it far without losing sight of the car. Noah began crying again, louder this time. The sound echoed inside the cold car. It wasn't just a normal cry. It was the kind that said he was uncomfortable and confused. Emily gently rocked him back and forth. "SHHH, it's okay. It's just a little adventure," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. She removed her thick winter coat and wrapped it around him over the blanket. She kept only a thin sweater on herself. The cold air touched her arms immediately, but she didn't care. Noah needed the warmth more than she did. She checked his tiny fingers again, rubbing them gently between her own hands. "Stay warm, little one," she whispered. Time began to feel strange. Without clear light outside, she couldn't tell how fast the evening was arriving. It felt like hours had passed, but when she checked her phone clock, it had only been 20 minutes since the car slid off the road. The wind grew louder. Snow tapped against the windows in uneven bursts. At times, it sounded almost like someone knocking. Each time she heard it, her heart jumped with hope. But there was no one there, just the storm playing tricks on her ears. Emily tried calling 911 again. She lifted her phone high, holding it near the windshield, near the side window, even near the back seat window. Still nothing. The call wouldn't connect. Her thoughts began racing. What if no one had seen her car slide off the road? What if the snow completely buried it? The color of her car blended easily with the storm. It wasn't bright or noticeable. She shook her head slightly. No, she could not think like that. She remembered stories she had heard as a child about people stranded during winter storms. Most of them survived by staying calm and conserving warmth. She focused on that idea now. She reached for the small emergency bag she kept in the back seat. Inside were a few items she always carried: an extra baby blanket, a bottle of water, some snacks, and a small flashlight. She took out the second blanket and wrapped it around Noah, layering it carefully over her coat. Then she tucked the edges around his body so the warmth would stay trapped inside. She turned on the flashlight briefly and looked around the car interior. Everything seemed still. Safe for now, but the cold was getting stronger. She could see her breath clearly in front of her face. Her fingers felt stiff. She rubbed her hands together and then gently rubbed Noah's back to keep him warm. "Stay with me," she murmured softly. She began talking to him, telling him simple stories about when he was born. She described how tiny he had been and how loud his first cry was in the hospital room. She told him how proud she had felt holding him for the first time. Her voice was shaky at first, but the more she talked, the steadier it became. Speaking helped her stay awake and focused. The storm outside didn't stop. Snow continued piling higher along the sides of the car. At one point, she tried opening the driver's door slightly, just to see if it would move. It pushed against a wall of snow and barely opened an inch. She quickly closed it again to keep the little warmth they had inside. The reality of their situation became clearer. They were stuck, completely stuck. Emily looked down at Noah. His crying had softened into quiet little sounds. His eyes were half open, blinking slowly. She pressed her cheek gently against his head, sharing as much body heat as possible. Her own body began to shiver. Small at first, then stronger. She tightened her jaw to stop her teeth from chattering too loudly. She didn't want to scare him. "Someone will come," she whispered again, though this time it sounded more like a prayer than a promise. She thought about her sister Rachel. Rachel would expect her to arrive soon. When she didn't show up, maybe she would call. Maybe she would alert someone. But what if the roads closed? What if phone lines were busy? The storm was affecting the whole area. Emily forced herself to stay positive. She began counting slowly in her head, trying to measure time. She knew she couldn't let herself drift into sleep. The cold made people sleepy. She had heard that before, so she kept talking. She sang softly too, even though her voice trembled. Simple lullabies she used at home. Songs about stars and quiet nights. The sound filled the small space of the car, mixing with the wind outside. Every few minutes, she checked Noah's face. She touched his nose and cheeks to make sure they were still warm. She adjusted the blankets again and again, as if small movements could protect him from the storm. Her phone battery dropped lower. She turned it off to save power, hoping she might need it later. The world outside had turned completely dark now. The only light came from occasional headlights far on the highway, but they were faint and distant. None of them slowed down. None of them seemed to notice the car hidden in the ditch. Emily felt a wave of fear rise again. She closed her eyes tightly and took a deep breath. "This is not the end," she told herself firmly. "You are his mother, you stay strong." She shifted slightly in the seat, holding Noah closer under her chin. Her arms ached, but she refused to loosen her grip. The storm roared louder, as if testing her courage. And in that cold, snow-covered car, with darkness pressing in from every side, Emily made a quiet decision. No matter how long it took, she would stay awake. She would keep her baby warm. Sheriff Daniel Reeves had seen many storms in his 18 years of service, but this one felt different. The snow had started earlier than expected, and the wind kept growing stronger with every passing hour. Most people in the county had already gone home, listening carefully to the weather warnings. The roads were nearly empty now, especially the long stretch of highway that ran between open fields and scattered trees. Daniel adjusted the heater inside his patrol car and glanced at the clock on the dashboard. His shift was almost over. Just one more slow drive along the highway, one more check to make sure no one was stranded, and then he could head home. He thought about his own warm house waiting for him, a simple dinner, a quiet evening. He felt tired, but it was the good kind of tired that came after a long day of honest work. Snow hit the windshield in thick waves, and the wipers moved back and forth at their highest speed. Even with them working hard, visibility was low. The world outside looked like a moving wall of white. Daniel drove carefully, his eyes scanning both sides of the road out of habit. During storms, small details mattered. A broken fence, a car parked strangely, tire tracks leading off the highway. Over the years, he had learned that sometimes the difference between safety and disaster was simply noticing something others missed. The radio crackled softly with routine updates from dispatch. Road conditions worsening. Minor accidents reported farther south. Nothing too serious yet. He slowed down as he approached a slight curve in the highway. The wind was stronger here, pushing snow across the road in swirling sheets. For a brief second, something unusual caught his eye beyond the guardrail to his right. It was barely visible, just a shape that didn't seem natural. He blinked and leaned forward slightly. Maybe it was just a snowdrift. He continued driving for a few more seconds. But something inside him felt unsettled. Over the years, he had learned to trust that quiet feeling. He checked his mirror. No cars behind him. Without overthinking, he slowed down, signaled, and carefully turned the patrol car around on the empty highway. The tires slid slightly, but he controlled the movement with steady hands. As he drove back toward the spot, his headlights scanned the ditch area more closely. The storm made it difficult to see clearly. Snow had piled up in uneven shapes. Then he saw it again. A faint curve. Not natural, too smooth to be just snow. He stopped the patrol car on the shoulder and turned on his emergency lights. The flashing red and blue lights reflected strangely off the falling snow, creating a bright glow in the darkness. Daniel pulled on his heavy gloves and stepped out of the cruiser. The wind hit him immediately, cold and sharp. Snow stung his face and gathered on his uniform within seconds. He closed the car door firmly and began walking toward the ditch. Each step sank deep into the snow, making movement slow and heavy. The storm muffled most sounds, but he could hear the wind clearly pushing against him. As he moved closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a snowdrift. It was the back end of a car. Only part of the bumper was visible now, nearly buried under layers of fresh snow. Daniel's heart rate increased slightly. He reached for his radio and spoke into it calmly. "Dispatch, I've located a vehicle off Highway 47 near mile marker 12. Appears partially buried." I'm going to check for occupants. Static answered briefly, then confirmation. He continued forward, brushing snow away from the trunk area to reveal more of the vehicle. It was angled downward in the ditch, almost hidden from view. From the highway, it would have been easy to miss, especially as snow continued covering it. He moved along the side carefully, clearing snow from the driver's side window with his gloved hand. The glass was fogged from the inside. That meant someone could be inside. He knocked firmly on the window. For a second there was no response. Then faint movement. A pale face turned toward him from inside the car. A young woman. Her eyes looked tired and wide with fear. Daniel knocked again and shouted over the wind, "Sheriff's office." "I'm here to help." The door seemed blocked by snow, so he pulled harder, pushing snow aside with his shoulder. After a few strong efforts, the door opened slightly. Cold air rushed into the car, and then he heard it. A soft, weak cry. A baby. Daniel's chest tightened. He leaned closer and saw the young woman holding a small bundle tightly against her chest. "Are you injured?" he asked firmly but gently. She shook her head slowly. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "My baby, please." He could see how tightly she was holding the child, wrapping him in layers of blankets and what looked like her own coat. The inside of the car felt like a freezer. Frost had begun forming at the edges of the windows. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "I don't know," she replied weakly. "Maybe an hour, maybe more." Daniel quickly assessed the situation. The engine was off. Snow had nearly sealed the car in place. With the temperature dropping fast, they didn't have much time. He spoke into his radio again, requesting immediate medical assistance. His voice remained calm, but his movements became quicker. "Listen to me," he said gently to the woman. "We're going to get you both out of here right now." He carefully reached toward the baby. "May I?" She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Daniel removed his heavy patrol jacket and wrapped it securely around the small bundle. He could feel how cold the air was inside the car. The baby's tiny face peeked out from the blankets, his eyes barely open. "You're a strong little guy," Daniel murmured softly, lifting him carefully into his arms. He turned and moved quickly but carefully through the snow toward his patrol car. The wind pushed against him, but he held the baby close, shielding him from the storm with his body. He opened the back door of the cruiser and placed the baby inside, turning the heater up to full power. Warm air began filling the space almost immediately. Then he hurried back for the mother. She tried to step out of the car, but her legs seemed weak. Daniel supported her arm firmly. "I've got you," he assured her. Snow reached nearly to her knees as they moved slowly toward the patrol car. The wind made it hard for her to keep her balance, but Daniel stayed steady beside her. When they finally reached the cruiser, he helped her into the back seat next to her baby. She immediately reached for him, checking his face, touching his tiny hands. "He's breathing, he's okay?" she asked anxiously. "He's breathing," Daniel confirmed. "Help is on the way." In the distance, faint sirens began to echo through the storm. Daniel closed the cruiser door and stood outside for a moment, snow falling around him. He looked back at the nearly buried car in the ditch. If he hadn't turned around, if he had assumed it was just a snowdrift. He didn't let the thought finish. Instead, he stepped back into the patrol car, adjusting the heater vents toward the back seat. The young mother held her baby tightly, tears mixing with relief on her face. And for the first time that evening, inside the warm glow of the patrol car, the storm outside didn't feel quite as powerful anymore. The warm air inside the patrol car slowly began to fill the small space, pushing back the freezing cold that had followed them from the stranded vehicle. Emily sat in the back seat, still shaking, her arms wrapped tightly around Noah. The red and blue emergency lights reflected across the falling snow, creating flashes of color in the dark night. Sheriff Daniel Reeves adjusted the heater again, making sure the warm air reached the back. He glanced over his shoulder to check on them. The baby was still, wrapped in layers of blankets and Daniel's heavy jacket. Emily kept touching his face gently, whispering his name over and over as if the sound alone could protect him. "You're safe now," Daniel said calmly. "The ambulance is almost here." Emily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on her son. "He was crying earlier, then he got quiet," she said softly, fear still in her voice. "That's normal in cold weather," Daniel replied in a steady tone. "The important thing is that he's with you and he's warming up." Outside, the wind continued to roar across the highway. Snow swirled under the flashing lights, making the scene look almost unreal. Within minutes, the faint sound of sirens grew louder. Headlights appeared through the storm, slowly approaching. Two paramedics stepped out of the ambulance, moving quickly but carefully through the snow. Daniel stepped outside to meet them, explaining the situation clearly and briefly. His voice remained professional, but his eyes showed concern. They brought a stretcher and medical bags to the patrol car. One paramedic gently opened the back door. "Hi there," she said kindly to Emily. "We're going to take good care of both of you." Emily nodded again, her fingers stiff from the cold. She carefully handed Noah to the paramedic, watching every movement closely. The paramedic checked the baby's temperature, his breathing, and his tiny hands. "He's cold, but he's responding," she said reassuringly. "We'll warm him up properly in the ambulance." Relief washed over Emily's face, but she still looked pale and exhausted. When she tried to step out of the patrol car, her legs wobbled. Daniel quickly reached out to support her. "Easy," he said gently. "Take your time." The cold air hit them again as they moved toward the ambulance. Even though the patrol car had warmed them slightly, the outside temperature felt shocking after a few minutes of comfort. Inside the ambulance, bright white lights replaced the dark storm. The doors closed firmly, shutting out the wind. Warm air filled the space immediately. The paramedics worked calmly and efficiently. They placed warm blankets around Noah and used special heat packs designed for situations like this. One paramedic monitored his heartbeat while the other checked Emily's hands and fingers. "You have some early frostbite signs," the paramedic explained gently. "We'll treat it right away. You did the right thing keeping him wrapped up." Emily barely listened to the details. Her eyes never left Noah. "He's okay?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "He's going to be okay," the paramedic confirmed with a small smile. "You got help just in time." Daniel stood near the back doors of the ambulance for a moment before stepping inside briefly. Snow covered his shoulders and hat, slowly melting in the warmth. "You're in good hands now," he told Emily. She looked at him for the first time since being inside the patrol car. Her eyes were filled with tears, but also gratitude. "If you hadn't seen us," she began, her voice breaking. Daniel shook his head slightly. "I'm glad I turned around," he said simply. The ambulance began moving carefully down the snowy highway toward the nearest hospital. Daniel followed behind in his patrol car, keeping a safe distance. The drive felt longer than usual because of the storm, but the roads had been cleared slightly by emergency crews. Inside the ambulance, Emily held Noah's tiny hand while the paramedics continued warming him slowly and safely. At the hospital, nurses were already waiting at the entrance with a rolling bed. The doors opened, and warm indoor air replaced the freezing storm outside. Emily felt a wave of relief just stepping into the bright hallway. Doctors and nurses worked quickly but calmly. Noah was taken to a treatment room where his temperature was monitored closely. Emily was guided to a nearby chair while a nurse carefully examined her hands. "You're very brave," the nurse told her softly. "Not many people would have stayed so calm in that situation." Emily shook her head. "I wasn't calm," she admitted. "I was terrified." "But you stayed strong," the nurse replied. "That's what matters." Daniel stood quietly near the hallway entrance. His shift had officially ended, but he hadn't left. Something about the situation kept him there. He wanted to make sure they were truly safe before he went home. After what felt like hours but was really less than one, a doctor stepped out of the treatment room with a reassuring smile. "He's stable," the doctor said. "Mild hypothermia but no lasting damage. You both arrived at the right time." Emily covered her face with her hands and let out a deep breath she felt like she had been holding all evening. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief. "Can I see him?" she asked quickly. "Of course." She walked into the room slowly. Noah lay wrapped in warm hospital blankets, a small monitor attached gently to his foot. His eyes were open now, moving softly as he looked around. Emily leaned over and kissed his forehead carefully. "You're my brave boy," she whispered. Daniel watched from the doorway for a moment. The bright hospital lights made everything feel safe and calm, so different from the dark ditch filled with snow. One of the nurses approached him quietly. "You found them just in time," she said. Daniel nodded. "I almost thought it was just a snowdrift." "Well," the nurse replied gently, "sometimes small decisions matter more than we realize." He stayed only long enough to hear the final confirmation from the doctor that both mother and baby would recover fully. Before leaving, he stepped softly into the room. Emily looked up at him again. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You saved my son." Daniel gave a small, humble smile. He gently tapped Noah's tiny foot under the blanket. "You're a tough little guy," he said quietly. Then he adjusted his hat, nodded once more, and walked out of the hospital. Outside, the storm was still falling, but it seemed less frightening now. The flashing emergency lights were gone. The highway would be cleared by morning. But inside that warm hospital room, a mother held her baby close, knowing that a simple second glance from a passing sheriff had changed everything. The storm lasted through the night, but by morning the sky had cleared. Sunlight spread across the snow-covered town, making everything shine as if nothing terrible had happened. Roads were slowly being cleared. Neighbors stepped outside to shovel their driveways. Life began moving again. Inside the hospital, however, the night had felt long and unforgettable. Emily barely slept. She sat beside Noah's small hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. Machines quietly monitored his temperature and heartbeat. Every soft sound made her look up, but each time she saw the same reassuring sight, her baby resting safely. When the doctor returned in the morning, he smiled warmly. "He responded very well," he said. "His temperature is stable now. We'll keep him for observation today, but he's doing great." Emily felt relief wash over her once again. The fear from the night before still lingered in her mind, but it was softer now, less sharp. She gently stroked Noah's tiny hand. "You scared me," she whispered softly to him, "but you stayed strong." A nurse entered the room carrying a cup of warm tea. "You should rest too," she said kindly. "You were out there in that storm just as long." Emily looked down at her fingers. They were wrapped in light bandages, treated for early frostbite. The pain had started to return now that warmth had come back, but she didn't complain. Later that afternoon, her sister Rachel rushed into the hospital room. Her eyes were red from worry. She had tried calling Emily the night before, but the storm had made phone connections unreliable. When she heard what happened through local radio updates about a highway rescue, her heart had nearly stopped. They hugged tightly, both overwhelmed with emotion. "I should have come to get you," Rachel said quietly. Emily shook her head. No one expected it to get that bad so fast. News of the rescue began spreading through the small town. It wasn't a dramatic headline or a loud media event. It was shared quietly, through neighbors, through hospital staff, through people who knew someone who knew someone. A young mother and her baby had been saved during the storm, and a sheriff had chosen to turn his car around. Sheriff Daniel Reeves went back to work the next day like it was any other shift. He filled out the official report describing the time, location, and road conditions. He didn't add anything extra. To him, it was simply part of his job, but something felt different inside him. Over the years, he had responded to many calls, car accidents, lost hikers, minor emergencies. Some situations ended well. Others were more difficult. Being in law enforcement required strength and steady thinking. But sometimes it also meant carrying heavy memories. This rescue felt lighter. It reminded him of why he had chosen this career when he was younger, not for recognition, not for praise, but for moments when showing up truly mattered. A few days later, once Noah was fully stable, Emily and her baby were discharged from the hospital. As she stepped outside into the cold winter air, she held Noah a little closer than before. The world looked the same. Snow still covered the ground. Cars still passed by on the street. But to her, everything felt more precious. She couldn't stop thinking about that second when Sheriff Reeves had decided to turn his car around. That small decision had changed the direction of her life. A week later, Emily wrote a handwritten letter. Her hands were still healing, but she took her time. She thanked Sheriff Reeves for his kindness, for his quick action, and for not ignoring what could have easily looked like nothing more than a pile of snow. She delivered the letter to the sheriff's office herself. When Daniel read it at his desk, he sat quietly for a long moment afterward. The letter wasn't long or dramatic. It was simple and honest. It ended with one sentence that stayed in his mind. "You didn't just save us. You reminded me that there is always hope, even in the middle of a storm." Months passed. Winter slowly turned into spring. Snow melted, revealing green grass beneath. Roads that had once been dangerous became safe again. Life continued forward as it always does. Noah grew stronger each day. His laughter filled the small house Emily rented. Every time she buckled him into his car seat, she double-checked everything carefully. She paid closer attention to weather reports. She trusted her instincts more, but she didn't live in fear. Instead, she carried gratitude. When Noah's first birthday approached, Emily made a quiet decision. She wanted the man who had found them in the storm to see the little boy he helped save. She wasn't sure if he would come. After all, he was a busy sheriff. But she sent the invitation anyway. Sheriff Reeves hesitated when he received it. Attending a birthday party wasn't part of his normal routine, but something about the invitation felt meaningful. On a bright afternoon, he stood outside Emily's small house holding a simple gift, a children's book about brave explorers. He knocked gently on the door. When Emily opened it, her face lit up with a smile. Inside, colorful balloons floated near the ceiling. A small cake sat on the table. Friends and family gathered around, laughing and talking. And in the middle of it all was Noah, sitting in a high chair, clapping his hands excitedly. Daniel stepped closer, and the little boy looked up at him with curious eyes. There was no fear there, no memory of the storm, just innocence. Emily knelt beside her son. "This is the man who helped us," she told him softly, though Noah was too young to understand. Daniel smiled gently and handed over the gift. As the afternoon went on, he found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't expected. He listened to laughter. He watched Noah smash cake with tiny hands. He saw the joy on Emily's face. It wasn't just about a rescue anymore. It was about a future that had almost been lost but wasn't. Before leaving, Daniel stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the fresh spring air. The sky was clear. No storm clouds anywhere. He realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the smallest choices. A second glance. A decision to turn around. A refusal to ignore something that doesn't feel right. Emily often tells the story now when winter returns each year. She doesn't tell it with fear. She tells it with strength. She talks about the night the snow tried to stop them. And about the man who didn't keep driving. Noah is older now. He runs across playgrounds, laughs loudly, and reaches for the sky without knowing how close he once came to danger. One day, when he's old enough, he will understand the full story. He will learn that in the middle of a powerful storm, when everything seemed dark and uncertain, someone chose to care. And that choice changed everything. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they simply notice what others might miss.